You know, I've been thinking about why am I even listing this bike for sale. I don't really want to sell it because it feels like one of the most perfect bikes I've ever had. And I've had BMWs, I've had Kawasaki's. This thing, as the type of bike that I do most of my riding, this one is near perfect. Okay, should I go? You know, the big ADV segment is really good for commuters like me. Too bad I don't really commute too much, but it's a fantastic bike. It is nimble, it's very comfortable. I kind of fit on this bike like a glove. And I've had various bikes, you know. The bike that Sean rides, the SD1300, I've had one of those. I've had an SD1100. I've had a GS. I have an Africa Twin. And these are all bikes that are great, but the Super Tenere has never been in my radar. And I only started to look at Super Teneres when I saw that the prices on these were kind of low. You know, this is a $20,000 bike, and of course this is the first year. That's why you get good deals on these. And even with the first year, they're still amazing to have because people just generally don't want like the old stuff. They upgrade. But if you don't mind getting caught in that rat race, something like this makes perfect sense. So first, it is incredibly comfortable, and you have that commanding position of the road that ADV bikes are known for. I mean, this bike does have a lot of presence. One of the issues with scooters for commuting, especially the small scooters, is that they have very little presence on the road. So people tend to like push you around a little bit. So you ride those things just a little bit differently than you would a big adventure bike like this. And other than the commanding presence, this thing is fun to ride. It does have a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde sort of mentality, that it's fast. You know, it's got touring mode and a sport mode. Touring mode should be economy mode. It does kind of quiet it down at low RPMs a bit. It just kind of makes it a little bit more docile. But this bike feels like a tractor, and with this amount of torque, it's very easy to ride, and you can keep up with sport bikes on twisty roads without any problem whatsoever. There's downsides to any bike, and I'll talk about those later, but the more I think about this, the less I want to sell this bike, because it does suit me pretty well. I was thinking, oh, should I get a Tenere 700? But I don't think those are really worth it very much, at least to me, because most of my riding is on the street. I don't need a 21-inch front wheel. Actually, a 21-inch front wheel will kind of hurt you for riding off-road or on the road in twisty roads. So a lot of times, in the pub, it might sound good to say that you have a 21-inch front wheel, you know, it's like very off-roady. But I don't really ride off-road much. Most of my riding is kind of sport touring with the occasional fire road. And this thing will do that. You know, I was thinking about what bike can you get? A open class adventure bike that's like over 1,000 cc's with a shaft drive. And I don't think you can get a bike used for the price that you can get this first gen Tenere. You know, I've gotten an FJR 1300, and that was a great deal. I think as a sport touring bike, you could get the FJR and the SD 1300, but the adventure segment is a little bit better just because you have that commanding presence of the road. You can see everything really well. The wide handlebars are very flickable. So to me, that's a great thing to have because they're so much easier to ride. Everything about adventure bikes are really good commuters. You know, it used to be that standard bikes were what people use for getting to work. You know, think of the Honda Ascot that I just had. That was a commuter. A CX 500 was a commuter. But now, a good adventure bike is the best commuter. They have generally a long range. They have a lot of flexibility. They have a great suspension, so like all the little potholes and stuff, they're a lot better, so you can kind of go over ripples on the road without really getting jarred too much. On a sport bike and sport touring machine, you do hit those things, and it does tend to feel a lot bumpier. The first gen Super Tenere that I'm riding, it really depends how it was used. If it was used off-road, yeah, it tends to have a little bit more damage, but generally $5,000 to $6,000 is what you'd expect to pay for a Super Tenere. And if you're in the used market, I would actually go after high mileage ones, because the high mileage doesn't really affect these bikes too much, because they are very large engines, very capable large engines. I think a lot of it too is that it's kind of a unique bike because it wasn't sold in great numbers. Every time you go to one of these cars and coffee, or bikes and coffee, there's a horde of BMW GS's, and it's always the same type of guy. It's like a dentist. It's people that, you know, they write to Starbucks, and that's pretty much it. Their bikes usually are spotless, and they outfit it with all of this sparkles, you know, like the luggage on those bikes costs more than my bike. And those guys have lost all touch of reality. They're paying $27,000 for a bike. I mean, $27,000, that's what people will pay for cars. You know, I'm not going to go into why BMW motorcycles are terrible. Come on, lady. I'm not going to go into why they're terrible, but you pay a premium for the brand, and it's not because they're better engineered. That's the marketing that they keep selling on the undeserving. Unfortunately, it's that old motto, a dumbass, what is it? The stupid man and his money is quickly removed. And that means to say that if you're dumb and you fall for marketing gimmicks, then a BMW is right for you. But it doesn't impress anybody. It's a shiny turd, and that's pretty much all it is. But the Super Tenere, it's very unique that not a lot of people have it. It wasn't a great seller, and in a way that's bad, because I wish there were cheaper parts, but there aren't. You know, these bikes, if you look on eBay, there's very few Super Teneres being divided for parts. Now you look at BMW, it's probably one of the most sold adventure bikes, but yet their parts are very expensive. And there's plenty of parts because there's a lot of scrap yards that get those bikes, and they, you know, just sell them completely out. And the thing is too, it's rare, but there's not a lot of these bikes that do break. It's a bike that's very solid. So when you have a solid bike, it's always good to, you'll never have any issues, but there are the downsides of, shoot, I'm gonna have to get into the right here. Oh, the Beltway, you gotta love this thing. This thing is just so good. You know, this is bumper to bumper traffic in the nation's capital, the Capital Beltway, and this thing just kind of floats around. Now let's talk about the downsides, because I'm a bummer. And you know, one of the problems with bike reviews is that they never tell you all the negative things. They never tell you about the negative things. So I'm going to talk to you about the negative things of the Super Tenere, and hopefully you can make up your mind. So number one bad thing about the Super Tenere, I think the mileage. The mileage is not great. It's actually average for something so big. 45, yeah, 43 to 45 miles to the gallon. You could get 50 if you try hard, but I've never really gotten that great of mileage. 45 is actually pretty good for something so big. And another big downside is that the gas tank on this is like 6 gallons, but it seems like it needs a little bit more. So this bike has got a weird fault. So when you're riding full tank of gas, you hit reserve at like at 170. So you get like a flashing light that your bike is running out of gas, and it starts a trip meter that counts up. That is so counterintuitive and annoying. It's like, why would it count up? It should count down, you know, like pick 70 miles and count down. But apparently they do that on purpose because people tend to run these bikes dry if, of course, there was a countdown going down. If it's up, then people think that they're low on fuel, and they will, of course, fill up much sooner. But on these pumps, they tend to go bad if you just let them run a little dry just for a little bit. It's typical with the fuel pumps that are inside the gas tank. But 6 gallons is not enough. You know, on an adventure bike like this, I want to be able to ride 250 miles and not worry about gas. Just because that's the nature of adventure bikes. When you go from place to place, and we, as adventure riders and even sport riders, we need a good range. And I think Yamaha did this on purpose because the weight of this bike is pretty high. It's higher than the GS, and the horsepower is lower than the GS. So it's kind of strange. Like, why would that be? Well, they didn't want to add 1 extra gallon, and the wet weight would increase so much more over the GS. But why would you even then bother about getting a lower powered bike and lower range than the GS? Well, this thing, look at it, this guy's driving on the shoulder. What a dummy. Yeah, look at that, just driving on the shoulder. Yeah, like, the thing is, this bike is very reliable, so you're not going to have a lot of issues with maintenance. So while the GS requires a little bit more work to keep going, and of course you have to follow those maintenance intervals really strictly, and the parts for the GSs are notoriously high, this thing is just like, it's like a tractor. You just feed it, you just change the oil, and it just keeps going. Another downside of the first gen Super Tenere, and this is what I'm finding, but I think I kind of escaped it, is that the ABS pump could go bad. And generally the ABS in the rear goes bad. So for me, it was a master cylinder that was leaking, I think, so I escaped it. And I did look online, and quite a few people had problems with the ABS pump, which is a German unit, and of course a German unit that broke in a Japanese bike, which is crazy. It's a Bosch, I believe. So the ABS pump tends to go bad. I've seen people that just bypass the ABS altogether, and that's a great idea, because having ABS on a bike, especially an adventure bike, could be bad. And here's another downside of the bike: you cannot turn ABS off. When you have a bike that's an adventure bike, it is nice to turn off ABS if you're riding off-road. On this, you can't turn it off. There are ways of bypassing it, like step on the second gear, rev. Some people built a fuse and a switch, and then that turns off your speedo. Yamaha should have just put a freaking button that bypassed the ABS. You know, just like, turn it off. That's all. I think the new ones, they might have that. But it's no big deal, because even with ABS, I can ride in the fire roads that I do. But it's nice to have no ABS off-road. Big Audi behind me tailgating me. If that was an Audi, what do you want me to do? There's cars in front of me, buddy. But one of the downsides of the first gen Super Tenere is that they had a bunch of like wiring problems and some recalls for the wiring, and I believe there was like a chain tensioner issue in the first gen, so it was louder. But I think that's why you get good deals on the first gen. And of course, on paper, these bikes just don't have a lot of horsepower, but to me, having a little bit more torque really helps. When you compare it to, say, the KTM, I think it's 1290 or something, the KTM 1290, it makes more horsepower but less torque. I wish this guy would leave the middle, the left lane. It's like, why? Why are you in the left lane, buddy? You know, I've also seen some Super Teneres that had engine problems. And most of the engine problems are guys riding off-road and hitting rocks. So it seems like the engine cases at the very bottom of the engine are very thin. I'm not really sure what's happening there because I tend not to really ride very aggressively off-road. And I tend to be a little bit... If I'm going to ride off-road, I'm not going to use this really big bike. I kind of like the idea of just using a dual sport or dirt bike. This is a douchebag in the Audi. He's been tailgating me this entire time. But it's hard to go bad on a Super Tenere like this. I mean, seriously, $6,000 gets you an open class adventure bike. To me, that's kind of even, that's ridiculous that you could actually make that happen. I looked at comparable GSs and you're paying twice that you do for this bike. And of course, it's got a shaft drive that doesn't seem to break on the BMWs. A shaft drive, I don't know, it seems to be like a temporary thing. It's like you gotta replace it once in a while. You gotta lube it once in a while. It's like, what's the purpose? What is the purpose of that? And whenever you go to Bob's BMW, which is the local BMW shop, lots of BMWs being serviced. Lots of BMWs. It's as if like that's their bread and butter is the service of BMWs. It's not actually selling bikes, it's the service. So yeah, I do recommend a Super Tenere. It's like probably one of the biggest bargains in adventure bikes that you can get. And you can get them so cheap. So in a way, talking about the Super Tenere just makes me want to keep it even more because it's such an underdog too. It's all of these bikes, they have all these bells and whistles, and this thing is an open class adventure bike that kind of flies under the radar, and I kind of like that idea. Alright Squids, thanks for watching, I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!
Oh, me so horny, me love you long time!
Kind of stuck here, the cops won't bother me.
Oh yeah, you can milk anything with nipples.
Kind of stuck here. The cops won't bother me.